What's up, guys? Dan Summers, Assistant Medical Director for the Crystal Shores EMS, and with me today is Justin Porter, a lieutenant with the Crystal Shores Fire Department. Today we're going to be showing you guys the ACE system, which is in use here in Crystal Shores at the sunny, beautiful hospital off of the Crystal Shores Beach. In front of us here we have a few boxes filled with some medical supplies that we use in the field here. So let me pull up our inventory of the box here. We'll open it up and take a look at what we got inside. So inside we've got some basic bandages, packing bandages, and elastic bandages, as well as quick clot. There's a variety of bandages and all have different uses and purposes. Basic bandages are the weakest link. They last the least amount of time, and a packing or basic bandage can only cover up part of a wound that a packing bandage might be able to cover up. Packing bandages, on the other hand, they'll cover up medium to large wounds, and once placed with an elastic bandage to hold them in place, they're much sturdier. They'll last much longer, allowing you to transport the patient more safely. And then the fourth bandage is quick clot, which is a combination of a packing bandage and elastic bandage. It's not quite as effective. It's not used quite as much as those two, but it is there in certain situations that can be useful. Followed by the bandages, we've got a tourniquet. This can be used to stop massive blood loss. It does have negative side effects. Unlike a bandage, this cuts off blood flow. Any drugs that you're attempting to use to heal the patient will be stopped by a tourniquet. And the tourniquet can cause other side effects from that blood loss and lack of circulation. They should only be used when absolutely necessary to stop large wounds on the limbs, and should be removed as soon as possible. Further down we have morphine, atropine, and epinephrine. Morphine is a pain reliever. Its side effect lowers the pulse or the patient's heart rate otherwise. Atropine, which is a nuclear biological chemical scenario type of deal. So basically, anytime a patient's got a chemical in their body and you need to try and get rid of it, you can use atropine. This is good for also counteracting the effects of morphine and epinephrine, which are more commonly used. Epinephrine has the opposite effect of morphine. It increases the patient's heart rate and counteracts allergic reactions that a patient may be having. Below that we have plasma, saline, and blood. Plasma and blood need to be refrigerated. They can only last roughly about 15 minutes outside of a refrigerated area. Certain ambulances are equipped with refrigeration units, however, many do not come with this, and they should be kept in the hospital in most situations. Saline does not have to be refrigerated. It can also restore patient's blood, but it's essentially just salt water. The plasma, as you guys can see, expands the patient's blood, and then the blood IV, of course, just restores the patient's blood outright. These all come in different milliliter amounts, 1,500 and 250. When treating a patient, you should try to use the least amount necessary. However, if the patient is severely wounded and you do have a 1,000 milliliter on hand, in certain situations you will need to use that. Further down we have a personal aid kit, which is used to fully heal a patient. In certain situations, depending on the county and state laws, you may only use this at a hospital. Right now, Crystal Shores is undergoing a debate on where this will be used, so this may be something that can fully heal a patient in the field, but that is yet to be determined. And below that is, of course, a body bag for deceased patients. So today we're going to be demonstrating the use on our test dummies over here. These fine gentlemen have elected to be wounded by our less than lethal rounds that will simulate real wounds. Before we get started here, let me show you guys how this works. As you guys can see, when I press Windows key on my tablet, it pulls up an interface with the patient. This allows me to not only interact with myself if I hit Control and Windows key to see any wounds on myself, but look at the wounds on the patient where they would be. As you guys can see, depending on where you look at the body, you will get different options. Only the limbs can have IVs administered. The head is used to check patient's pulse and blood pressure. And the torso area is where the triage card is kept. As we work with our patient here today, Justin Porter will be handling drugs and medication. Now we will be working with bandages for this particular patient. Anything we do with the patient should be communicated with one another as we are partners, and well, we may be sticking to just one thing. Nonetheless, any information such as that should be communicated to risk avoiding a double dosage of drugs or wasting potentially important time. So we're going to take a baseline on the patient here. We're going to get his blood pressure and heart rate. So the patient's blood pressure is 120/80 and his heart rate is 80. These are the standards that most patients should have. Some people you may encounter will have a slightly elevated heart rate from running and other strenuous activities. This isn't out of the average or norm that you might experience. So it's nothing to be alarmed about if it's slightly elevated, like say 81/88. And of course, we're going to check the patient's responsiveness, and of course he is responsive. So Mr. Porter here is going to shoot our patient in the leg. Alright, let's take a look at him here. Medic. If you look at the left side of your screen, you'll see a UI has appeared showing the patient's right leg, or left leg I should say, is wounded. The patient is bleeding, he's in pain, and he has one large velocity wound. From this point, I will be, of course, bandaging him using a packing bandage. To get a better view on the patient, you may need to move from time to time, as this system, as I said, will move depending on where you look at the patient. Now, of course, this shows that his wound has been bandaged. His left leg now shows as purple as opposed to red. With that being said, however, we do want to put a dressing over the bandage, so we're going to use an elastic bandage as well. Now, as you guys can see, under the left side, it shows that I've checked the patient's blood pressure, I've checked his heart rate, checked his responsiveness, and I've bandaged him twice. Going to his triage card shows no entries, however. This will show any medications or drugs that have been given to the patient, as well as allowing us to change his status. We're going to put him as minor since he's essentially healed, minus a large wound on his leg, but he's still stable enough for transport to the hospital for stitches. And, of course, some rest and relaxation. Justin, would you do us the favor of giving the patient morphine in order to help him with his pain? I'm going to check his pulse and heart rate before that, though. These are important to know before giving a patient any drugs. His heart rate's at 81, so he's a little bit upset from being shot in the leg. Actually quite calm, all things considered. Let's stand up here, get a better angle on him. And his blood pressure is 116/77 from some blood loss from the wound. Still pretty solid number, though.
Go ahead and put in the morphine in now.
Alright.
Morphine's in.
Alright, so the patient's pain has gone away. And as I said, Justin properly displayed, communication whenever a drug is injected into a patient. Let's take a look at his pulse again here. So his pulse has already dropped to 61. That's quite a drop from 81 just a few seconds, beforehand. That's a drop of 20 on his pulse, and it's probably not done dropping yet. Let's check it again. We'll see where it's at now. So it's already 41. That's a drop of 40 points in less than a minute. Now imagine if this patient was a heart rate of 60 and you gave him morphine for his pain. He would have a heart rate of 20 and he would be down on the ground unconscious. Justin, would you be so kind as to apply epinephrine to our patient?
Hitting him with epi. Got the epi in.
So you're often bound to experience several patients who have likely injured themselves and are in pain, but don't actually have any wounds, or their wounds were small and they were injured or treated properly already. In these situations, it may not be necessary to give epinephrine. Instead, you can simply have the patient jog around or do strenuous activity to bring their heart rate back up. With that being said, though, any patient that you give morphine to should be properly monitored for a period of time until their heart rate returns to a normal area. Not only can a low heart rate cause unconsciousness, but it can also drop blood pressure. Once a patient's blood pressure drops to 0/0, the patient is officially deceased. A patient with no heart rate, however, that does have blood pressure can be resuscitated using CPR. Alright, so with the epinephrine, the patient's heart rate has only returned up to 61 so far, and it's clearly taking longer to take effect. With that being said, though, we don't want to push epinephrine any sooner than we have to, when we can simply take the patient to the hospital for proper treatment by the staff's doctors. Okay, so we showed you the basics of how to use bandages and how to use drugs. We're going to now show you how to interact with a patient. Would you bring this gentleman to unconsciousness, please? Okay, so our patient's now unconscious. Let's check his heart rate and blood pressure. So his heart rate's elevated from being shot. His blood pressure's already dropped to 114/76. He's showing wounds on his torso, his left arm, and his left leg. Right now I'm looking at his head and I see no injuries. Let's move over to his left arm and take a look, see what's going on there. He's lost a lot of blood. He's got one medium wound and he's in pain in his left arm. Justin, would you do me the favor of placing a packing bandage on his left arm? He's got one large avulsion on his torso, and he's also lost a lot of blood. And his leg has one large avulsion and one large velocity wound. Let's check his heart rate and his blood pressure again. His heart rate's actually continuing to increase from the trauma. However, his blood pressure is continuing to drop despite this fact. The increased heart rate will help him continue to produce blood that he is losing, but it can have negative side effects as well. If we were to perform the CPR on the patient in this state, we would actually pump blood out of his body more quickly, in fact, increasing the speed at which he loses his blood pressure.
We're gonna need to throw a cat on this left leg.
Alright. So we'll display the use of a tourniquet here, and we'll show the effects that it has. Alright, are you placing tourniquet?
Strapping it on right now. Alright, I got one tourniquet on.
Alright, well, Justin's performing the tourniquet. We don't want to push any drugs at the moment. So, Justin, I want to bandage up his torso while you finish working on his leg, okay?
Gotcha.
Now, generally in the field, you want to have one person working on one job. However, if you have an odd number of men, and as long as you communicate properly, it is okay in some situations for multiple people to do the same task. Just make sure, once again, like I said, you avoid double dosing the patient or you avoid wasting time by performing the same action. So the patient's lost a lot of blood. However, his leg wounds are still there, but they have been slowed by the tourniquet. Let's take a look at his pulse one more time here. He's got a heart rate of 84 still. However, his blood pressure is 81/54. Now, let's try to give him morphine here. I want to give the patient morphine. Alright, Justin?
Alright.
Now, of course, the morphine, as we already know, will lower his heart rate. It looks like our patient's actually starting to regain consciousness here. Now, in a normal situation with the tourniquet on the patient should have remained in pain. However, in this situation, it seems this patient was a bit more resilient and actually managed to take to the morphine regardless of the tourniquet being in place. If you do give a patient a drug and it doesn't seem to take effect properly, if you give them blood, morphine, atropine, epinephrine, anything like that, and you don't see an effect, check to make sure that there isn't a tourniquet on the patient somewhere. This, as I said, can stop circulation of not only the blood, but any drugs in the bloodstream. In the case of this patient, this is my first time experiencing this, so he's a bit of a mystery here, but he has somehow, like I said, taken to the drug despite the fact that he shouldn't have. He has seen some blood loss, though. Despite being conscious, we do want to get him some blood. As I said, in the field, we don't actually carry blood or plasma. We carry saline, which does not need to be refrigerated.
We're going to want to go ahead and hit him with a bag first.
Okay, so he's 72/48, which is a pretty moderate level. It's not where it should be, but it's not near death either. Regardless, you do want to get that blood pressure back up to a normal and acceptable level here. Alright, are you placing the IV?
We're going to want to put it in that right arm.
Alright, I've got the IV. Alright, I'm giving the patient 500 milliliters of saline. Okay, so as you noticed, the blood pressure didn't change when I checked it. Now, saline, blood, and plasma can take a while to take effect. It should be noted. So just because you don't see an immediate change doesn't mean that you need to give the patient more blood or saline. Chances are that the patient is taking to it, it's just taking a bit longer than you'd expect. Let's check the patient's blood pressure once again. So it's at 71/47. So it's actually still dropping here. The patient is bandaged, however, their heart rate is probably still down from the morphine that they were given. Indeed, their heart rate is 34. I want to apply some epinephrine to our patient here. Alright, epinephrine's going into the right arm. Alright, now epinephrine's going into the patient's right arm. Now this is a proper display of how heart rate can affect blood pressure. Now obviously, as I said, that saline should have healed the patient, should have started them on the path back to getting their blood pressure back to a proper place. Instead, despite the saline, the patient was still losing blood pressure, at a much slower rate albeit. However, due to their low heart rate, their heart wasn't pumping out as much blood. Now, as the epinephrine starts to take effect, it should give the saline bag a chance to start producing enough blood to get them closer to that level we want. Now, if this patient was unconscious and we feared that without getting them to the hospital immediately, we would be able to carry them and place them in a vehicle and continue treatment inside the vehicle. However, it is ideal to be able to stabilize a patient while on scene and then transport to the hospital when possible. This increases their chance of survival ultimately, as treatment in a vehicle can be difficult at times. And we'll show that with our last patient here, as soon as we get this gentleman back up and going and on his way. Now, while we are waiting for his heart rate to pick back up and his blood pressure to pick back up, we should be constantly checking his vitals and communicating them with the team. So his heart rate is 47, his blood pressure is 73/49. So as you guys have seen, his blood pressure is now starting to rise as we predicted. You also need to keep an eye on bandaging. As I said, any strenuous activity or even just a period of time passing can cause the bandages to come loose on the wounds, and they will need to be replaced if you wish to keep your patient alive, obviously. Alright, patient's heart rate is still at 46. I'm going to push some more epinephrine on the patient here. Now, as I said, you don't want to push too many drugs on a patient. However, in this situation, his heart rate is starting to drop again, which will threaten, of course, his blood pressure in turn. Blood pressure is 76/51 now. Going back to our triage card, our patients had 1 morphine and 2 epinephrine, as we can see. We're going to put him as delayed, since obviously he's not walking on his own quite yet. He's still in pretty rough shape. The patient is once again in pain. And we should probably look at removing that tourniquet from his leg. So if you look on our UI here, we have the option to remove a tourniquet, despite the fact that Justin was the one who placed it. So we're going to take that off here. Alright, so the tourniquet's removed. That should also help the saline take effect. Alright, so his heart rate is now up to 70, so that was quite the jump here. And his blood's 78/52. Now, that might not be a huge increase, but it's obviously going much faster now that the tourniquet has been removed from him and the saline's been allowed to take effect, as well as the epinephrine.
He would be stable at this point for transport, so I say we could go ahead and show the effects of maybe adding a blood bag.
Alright.
Because at this point he had been stabilized and we would have been close to, if not at the hospital by now.
Alright, so if you want to do the honors of placing a blood bag, I didn't grab one here.
Alright, putting a blood bag on the right arm, 250.
Now, as you guys can see, when a IV is placed on the patient, you can actually see the IV draining into the patient. You can see as the milliliters drop. As they go down, it's obviously going into the patient. So this will help you monitor a patient as well. As Justin stated, when you get the patient to a stable place, you want to try and get them to transport. Now, a normal person would have been able to walk on their own to our ambulance with us and get in. Obviously, this isn't a normal patient, it's a training dummy, and he can't really move too far. Unless, of course, there's a ghost in the machine, but that's a different story. As I also stated, depending on where you look at a patient, you'll get different options, and you guys may have noticed this throughout the video. Obviously, looking at the head, as I stated earlier, will give you your pulse, blood pressure, and reaction. So if you don't see options, try looking at a different part of the body, or make sure that you have the drugs on hand. Any options will automatically appear as long as you have the correct items for that job.
All 67, 81, 54.
Alright. So his heart rate's actually dropped a minor amount. It was at 70 here. But his blood pressure is looking pretty good, and he's pretty much stable. So we're going to say we're good on this patient. Obviously, he's not standing, but he's conscious. He's transported to the hospital at this point, and he would have been fully healed and treated by doctors. We don't have any surgical kits or authorized use of personal aid kits on the grounds here for training purposes. So we're going to move on to our next patient and display interactions with an unconscious patient on this person. Alright, so we need to knock him unconscious and show interactions with the patient, moving him to the vehicle. Okay, Justin?
Alright.
He's a resilient one, isn't he? There we go. Alright, we're going to check his responsiveness, and as you might expect, he is indeed unconscious. Alright, his blood pressure is 109/73.
Alright, I'm seeing 4 large wounds on the left arm.
Okay, so let's say for whatever reason we need to move the patient. Perhaps he's in the middle of a road, or perhaps you're in a dangerous situation and you need to get him out of here. You go to your interactions menu with the patient. With an unconscious patient, you're able to either carry them or drag them. You can also frisk them and open their inventory to check, make sure they don't have any illegal drugs or weapons on them that could be a threat to you or your other EMS. Now, for the sake of this video and training exercises, we're going to move the patient over to the HEMT on loan from the military while our ambulances are currently in the shop being worked on here. Now you want to scroll on your user interface on your tablet here in order to release the patient. Using our interactions menu again, we should load the patient into the vehicle. So our patient's now inside of our HEMT here, and we're going to climb inside as well. So, Justin, would you do us the favor and begin to drive us around the block? As you guys can see, I have an option to interact with all passengers inside the HEMT. This includes Justin Porter and our test dummy here. I have the ability to unload the patient who is unconscious. This is the only way you can interact with the patient. As I stated before, if a patient's conscious, you don't have these options. We're going to look at his medical. Alright, so we can see that his left arm is injured. Alright, so now you see one of the issues of treating a person inside of a vehicle. He's got 4 large wounds, and we have our options, however many of them seem to be covered up. So, we do still have enough room to bandage him, so we're going to continue to try and treat him while transporting around the block here. Alright. Alright, so patient has no blood pressure. As you guys can now see, the patient did die just now. Justin Porter is now listed as our only patient. Alright, so let's get the vehicle parked here. Now this demonstrates not only how to transport a patient, but why it's important to stabilize the patient before you transport them too far. Now, had we the opportunity to both treat him instead of me treating him alone in the back, we may have been able to save him by not only being able to bandage him in time, but giving him drugs that could have saved his life, as well as any potential blood or saline that we had on hand. Now, as I stated before, if the patient did have any heart rate, we could attempt CPR, however, this isn't the case. Dead patients generally cannot be interacted with, however, we can give the patient a body bag here. Now, there's not many interactions you can have with a body bag or the patient inside. However, you can at least drag them and move the patient out of the area. Patients in body bags cannot be placed inside vehicles, picked up, but only dragged. Using the scroll wheel to release him, just like we did when we carried him. Our test dummy here, Mr. Bob Johns. No, I'm kidding, of course, Bob. Gets to enjoy some shade here in his forever sleep. Well, Mr. Porter, do you think we've missed anything for the purposes of this training video?
When it comes to transporting a patient, if you have to come down to maximum circumstance and you have to get in, grab and go, get them to a safe spot, get them down the road a little bit, and then stop and start treating. If the absolute worst thing to do, slap a tourniquet on whatever part of the body that is if wounded, and that will give you just that little bit more time. But that is in a last case scenario. If something really bad happens.
Alright, well, we appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this training video. We hope you guys learned something, and once again, as the original video stated, this isn't a substitute to training. This is intended as a supplement to aid in any training or any arrest in the Crystal Shores use of the ACE system.